So today we talk about the transformation of consciousness. Actually, whole of Krishnamurti's teaching is concerned with transformation of consciousness, by which he meant it's a wholly different way of approaching life, with a consciousness that has no priority for self-interest. So that's completely different. In the last visit in 1985, he said to me one day, "Sir, all the sorrow in the world is because we have not learned to love from the bottom of our heart." And of course, by love, he meant freedom from the self. Because he said there is love when the self is not. So that is the essence of his demand of his teaching. And I have brought with me a question and answer which took place in Santa Monica, California in March of 1974. Because I think it's relevant for all of us. A questioner asked him, and this is from the book Meeting Life, which is published by all the foundations. The questioner asked him, "I have been listening to you for some time now, but no change has come about. Krishnamurti responds, "I have been listening for some years to your talks and no change has come about in me." Then don't listen anymore. Now look, sir, if you listen to somebody for years and you see for yourself the beauty of what is being said, then you want to listen more. Then it opens doors to you, which you have never seen before. But if it doesn't, then what is wrong? What is wrong with the speaker who says these things? Or what is wrong with the listener? Why is it that a man or woman who has heard the speaker for many years is not changed? In that there is great sorrow, is there not? You see a flower, a lovely flower by the wayside, you glance and pass by. You don't stop to look. You don't see the beauty, the quiet dignity, the loveliness. You pass by. What is wrong? Is it that you are not serious? Is it that you don't care? Is it that you have so many problems that you are caught up in them, no time, no leisure to stop, so that you never look at that flower? Or is it that what the speaker is saying has no value in itself? Not what you think about it, but in itself, it has no value. Has it no value? To determine whether it has or has not, you have to investigate what the speaker is saying. And to investigate, you must have the capacity to listen. You must be able to look. You must give your time to it. So is it your responsibility or is it the responsibility of the speaker? It is our mutual responsibility, isn't it? Both of us have to look. The speaker may point out, but you have to look. You have to go into it. You have to learn. And if your mind is not diligent, but negligent, if your mind is not watching, highly sensitive, it is your doing. That means you have to change your ways of life. Everything has to be changed to learn a way of living which is entirely different. And that demands energy. You cannot be lazy, indolent. So since it is our mutual responsibility, maybe more yours than that of the speaker. Perhaps, sir, you have not given your life to it. We are talking about life, not about ideas, not about theory, practices, not even techniques, but to look at this whole life, which is your life, and to care for it. And that means not to waste your time. You have a very short time to live, maybe 10, maybe 50 years, but don't waste it. Look at it, give your life to understand it. So this is the essence of his teaching, that we have to learn for ourselves. He can only point it out. And that's the work, hard work that one has to do. And we saw yesterday how our conditioning creates the ego, and that ego blocks perception of the truth, because it makes us look at from a particular point of view and not see the whole. Therefore, it is necessary to free oneself of the conditioning, and even more than that, to free oneself of this domination of self-interest in our consciousness, which blocks all love. So the blocks are within our own consciousness. And that's why it is necessary for human beings to engage in this inquiry of self-knowledge with a learning mind, which is the true religious mind. Unfortunately, we have mistaken religion to mean belief and rituals and a certain moral code to be practiced. But we have seen that none of those really gives wisdom, which is necessary for the transformation of consciousness. The first requirement for engaging in self-knowledge is to be acutely aware of one's ignorance. Ignorance not as lack of knowledge or information, but as illusion. He pointed out that what we think is love is not love. That we don't know what really love is. What we think is religion is not real religion. What we think is education is not real education. So there is tremendous ignorance, but one is unaware of one's ignorance because one has emphasized the value of knowledge. And one is blinded by the importance of knowledge. And is unaware of ignorance. We think that the ignorant villager is the ignorant man. In the book, Education and Significance of Life, Krishnaji states that the ignorant man is not the unlearned, but the one who does not know himself. And the learned man is stupid when he depends on his knowledge to give him understanding. Now this religious quest, the inquiry, is much older than the scientific quest. These two quests are the great quests humanity has engaged in for truth. The scientific quest is for truth regarding how nature functions, how the external world functions around us. And the religious quest is for understanding how our consciousness functions. So these are two complementary quests. But we have ignored this quest for self-knowledge because it has no part in our education. And we have emphasized only knowledge. And we have promoted scientific inquiry and made great strides in our understanding of how the external world operates, all of which has generated a lot of power. But we are extremely ignorant about our consciousness, our relationships, our own life. And this lopsided development of the human mind is responsible for all the problems that we face in society and in our personal life. Therefore, it is necessary for human beings to learn about themselves. It is necessary to change education, to inculcate this inquiry in the young mind. That's our responsibility as teachers, which we have ignored to a large extent. Now, in order to understand oneself, you have to observe yourself, watch yourself with a learning mind. In the Upanishads, which are perhaps 3,000 years old, there is mention of two birds sitting on a tree. The first bird is nibbling at the fruit and tasting the sweetness or sourness or bitterness of it. And the second bird is only watching what the first bird is doing. The verse says that the human consciousness is both these birds in one. The first bird represents the ego. The second bird represents awareness, the capacity for watching. And it says the learning comes from the second bird. And that's what Krishnamurti also taught, that in order to learn about oneself, one must look at one's consciousness as a phenomenon to be understood and approach it with a learning mind, not a judgmental mind, which is saying this is good, this is bad, this should be there, this should not be there, and not interfering with the phenomenon. So he talked about passive awareness or choiceless awareness, because choice is usually based on pleasure. And that's the consequence of the ego. So can we watch ourselves not through the ego part of our being, but through the universal consciousness which is there in all of us, which is this capacity for awareness. The ego is built up by thought. It is thought that creates desire, that gives ideas about success, about domination, about prevailing in the world, and so on, making us ambitious, accumulating wealth for the future, developing attachments to avoid the fear of loneliness, and seeking power and prestige to overcome the fact of being nobody. So when we talk about transformation of consciousness, one is talking about a totally, wholly different way of living. And to come upon that, one has to learn what is false. One has to learn about one's own consciousness as it operates. If you suppress, if you escape, if you interfere with the way it operates, you are not learning, you are manipulating your consciousness. On the contrary, if you can look at it with a witness consciousness, a passive awareness, as a scientist looks at a phenomenon which he tries to understand. If a scientist wants to understand how a fish lives, he watches how it is born, how it swims, what it eats, how it lays eggs, reproduces, everything, his whole life from birth to death. And that's what brings understanding of the life of a fish. In the same way, can one watch oneself with passive awareness only with the intention of learning about one's own consciousness. Not saying it should be this way, it should be that way, not judging. The learning mind doesn't judge. The learning mind is only interested in learning and is looking at the phenomenon to understand cause and effect. As in science, so in religion. But the orthodox religions have not done this. They have, on the contrary, given beliefs which have divided humanity, and it becomes a travesty of anything that is religious. So to be aware of one's ignorance and therefore to want to learn and discern what is true is this process of self-knowledge. Without that, self-knowledge doesn't even begin. If you think you already know, you already have a view which you are defending, then you are not learning. It's similar in science, except that knowledge has a big role there. But we went into it yesterday, that you have to go beyond knowledge in order to come upon new discoveries, which are only possible with insight. And insight occurs when there is not an attachment to the known, when there is an element of freedom from the known. Our consciousness has two planes. On one plane, there is our will, there are paths, there is knowledge. There are techniques to be learned and so on. There is this other plane, which is a plane of silence, of awareness, which is not a thought process. And occasionally, a channel opens up from this other plane to the plane of our daily life. And it reveals something new, which transforms the way we live. So that's how the learning takes place. That channel opening is a mysterious process, which is the process of insight. We went into it yesterday that you need that also for scientific discoveries or major discoveries in art and music and dance, everything. And it's not a process of thinking. Great musicians have also said, I don't think out my music. I just tune my mind like I tune my piano, and the music which is out there in the world flows through it. So it comes like a revelation. It doesn't come from the brain, which has memory and knowledge. Of course, awareness also functions through the brain, but it's not the product of the brain. So Krishnamurti taught that the mind is outside the brain. The brain is the organ inside the skull. It does its job of remembering, of memorizing, of learning techniques and all that. At a certain level, you need all that. But far more important than that is this other plane, which is the plane of awareness. And unfortunately, we have relied too much on the intelligence of thought and too little on awareness. And he is asking us to use awareness instead of thought or analysis, because he points out that thought and analysis cannot take you to the truth, because They arise from memory, and memory contains all the illusions that we have discussed yesterday. So thought is not a good instrument to use for self-knowledge. One must use the capacity to watch, to pay attention, to be aware, simply with a motive to understand life, which is a mystery to be lived, not a problem to be solved. But we have approached life like a problem to be solved. So the approach has to change, not from an egoistic approach to an approach of love, of understanding. And that is the transformation that is necessary. Now, he also said that it's not a matter of time, and that has created a lot of confusion in the minds of people. They think that you don't have to do anything. You just have to wait, and it will all come to you in a flash, in a moment, and you will get enlightenment. It's not like that. That's a misunderstanding. I want to share with you on the screen a question and answer with regard to this. Somebody asked a question, is there such a thing as transformation? And Krishna says, I don't know, I clicked in the wrong place somewhere. Is there such a thing as transformation? What is it to be transformed? Krishnamurti says, when you are observing, seeing the dirt on the road, seeing how politicians behave, seeing your own attitude towards your wife, your children, and so on, transformation is there. Do you understand? To bring about some kind of order in daily life, that is transformation, not something extraordinary out of this world. When one is not thinking clearly, rationally, be aware of that and change it, break it. That is transformation. If you are jealous, watch it. Don't give it time to flower. Change it immediately. That is transformation. When you are greedy, violent, ambitious, trying to become some kind of holy man, see how it is creating a world of tremendous uselessness. I don't know if you are aware of this. Competition is destroying the world. The world is becoming more and more competitive, more and more aggressive. And if you change it immediately, that is transformation. And if you go very much deeper into the problem, it is clear that thought denies love. Therefore, one has to find out whether there is an end to thought, an end to time, not philosophize over it and discuss it, but find out. Truly, that is transformation. And if you go into it very deeply, transformation means never a thought of becoming, comparing. It is being absolutely nothing. So it goes, this self-knowledge goes all the way from learning by observing the dirt on the road and going deeper and seeing what comparison and jealousy that does, and freeing oneself of that, freeing oneself of competition and rivalry. And then finally he says, you free yourself of this thought process. And of course, in that whole process, there is freedom from the ego. Then there is love. When there is, the ego does not dominate in consciousness, then one is living in a state which is a state of love. So this whole thing is a process. And the more self-knowledge you have, the greater clarity you have. And that means you have greater energy to inquire further. So there is no end to this process. The learning mind is constantly learning about itself, because that's its passion. Just as the ambitious man has its passion for achievement, this learning mind has passion for learning. And the passion for learning is not an egoistic passion. But we have not been trained to do that. And it has become a habitual process to approach life with ambition and to give great importance to achievement. In society, we worship the man who can achieve something, even if it just means running a little faster or jumping a little higher than other human beings. It's given tremendous importance that man becomes a hero and so on. All that is artificial, psychological, illusory. But that's being promoted in society. And to see the falseness of that and to free yourself from that, that is transformation. So it's connected with one's daily life. It is not something outside this world which dawns on you under a pepper tree or under a bodhi tree and transforms you. Nor is it something that the guru gives you which transforms you. Those are all illusions. The transformation is a byproduct of learning. There is no real change except as a consequence of learning. This kind of learning, not the learning of knowledge. That only generates power and ability, not goodness. So Krishnamurti talked about flowering in goodness. Flowering is something that happens naturally. You can sow a plant, you can water it, protect it from storms and so on, but it flowers. Nature makes it flower. You can't make it flower. In the same way, goodness must flower in human consciousness, not through your will or effort, not by practicing, first formulating what is goodness and then practicing it. That is not goodness. Conscious goodness is not goodness. So he taught that virtue cannot be practiced. Virtue is a state of being. And that's a state of order in consciousness. Order has no cause. It is there throughout nature. Disorder has a cause. The egoistic approach to life is the source of all disorder. But it will end only when you realize the falseness of that approach. And in order to realize that, you must live with it, not just blame it, say that it should not be there and so on. Your opinion doesn't act on it. But if you watch it long enough, stay with that question, you may come upon the realization that it is the cause of all your problems and the disorder, both in your personal life and in society. When you see the danger of it, perceive it like you perceive hunger, not through logic and reason, but direct perception, then it changes. Because nature has put an intelligence into us which does not let us court danger. But we court danger because we are unaware of the danger. And that our unawareness is our ignorance. But because it is ignorance, because it is illusion, it can be ended through this quest for what is true and what is false. So self-knowledge is the root of wisdom. And wisdom is completely different from knowledge. Because self-knowledge is completely different from knowledge of the external world. So I'll end it here, and we can have questions. And as I said earlier, yesterday, the questions can be based on this talk that I have just given, or any of the talks that you have listened to in this series, or even what you have read of Krishnamurti's teachings. It doesn't matter. If I have to say something, I will respond to the question. If I don't know the answer, I will say I don't know. And that is part of self-knowledge, is to be completely honest, no pretense, no desire to impress. To be oneself, but watch oneself in order to learn about oneself. That understanding brings change. Not our effort to change doesn't bring change. That sustains the ego. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
You're welcome.
We have a question from Shankar.
Yeah.
Sir, could you please explain one moment in what is right now, which you are experiencing in this Zoom meeting while answering our questions?
I'm passionately interested in this inquiry, and I'm experiencing the joy of sharing it with others who are similarly interested in this learning. That's what I'm experiencing.
A question from Prasad Mulupuri. Sir, what does the muck thrown up by the subconscious or inner layers by way of dreams indicate? Can we take it as the cleansing process?
I can tell you what Krishnamurti has said about this and refer you to one of his books, which is entitled Wholeness of Life. It's a series of dialogues with David Bohm and some others, where he points out that this freedom from the self, freedom from the ego, is just the beginning of learning. Before that, learning does not even start. Once one has learned that, and the thought process becomes silent, you come upon a silent mind. The subconscious begins to enter into the conscious. It can also be watched and understood and emptied. Similarly. And when that is done, then the collective subconscious of the race comes into the consciousness. And that is also to be observed and learnt about. That's why this learning has no end to it. Self-knowledge has no end to it. You keep on learning about it. But as you learn, real change takes place. Not your desire to change, but actual change. Actual change meaning your approach in all your relationships change. Your approach to life changes. Effortlessly. Not because of some imposed discipline from your side. So he explains that the true meaning of discipline is to learn. Not what we think discipline is. That is not discipline.
Now we have a question from Ruth and Walter. What was the opinion of J.K. about H.P. Blavatsky and her books, The Voice of Silence and The Secret Doctrine?
I have never known him to express opinions about other people. Maybe in private life, with intimate friends, he may have expressed opinions. I don't know that. But I never found him in my relationship with him. I never found him talking about or expressing opinions about other people. So I don't know.
The next question is from Saurabh Kumar. Sir, wealth is necessary for survival, so why is its accumulation not right?
There is no such thing as right and wrong. We went into it last time. What you're doing with love, not with the ego, is right action. And what you're doing with the ego is wrong action. So it's not that accumulating wealth is wrong, but you have to look at it, what is the motive in accumulating wealth? And if you are accumulating because you have excessive fear of the future, then you have to learn about that fear, which is causing you to accumulate more and more. And the possessiveness which we have accepted in society, Krishnamurti never accepted it, but we have all accepted in society this whole idea of private property. And it belongs to the family, and it goes from father to son, and so on. So there are rich people and there are poor people. And there is this division between rich and poor. You don't share your wealth with others who are needy. Or you do occasionally in order to feel good, to do charity. But that doesn't transform your consciousness. Which is not to say you must not do charity or must not give alms to the beggar, but that in itself is not kindness or compassion. An act of kindness or compassion is not the same as kindness or compassion in your consciousness. Because when it is part of your consciousness, it will express itself in all your relationships, not in some particular directions which you have decided on.
Now I will read a question from Prasad Mulupuri. Sir, how do I know whether my observer is observing, let us say, a flower, or is there only observation of the flower?
The observer chatters, no? And you can, if you are watchful, you see the chattering of the mind of the observer. It will give a name to the flower. It will bring up all this botanical knowledge of the flower. It will compare that flower with other flowers and say that is more beautiful, this is less beautiful, and so on. All of which becomes a distraction from paying attention to the beauty of that flower. So when the mind is free of all this comparison and constant judgment and chattering, then only it is able to really pay attention and perceive the beauty. We talked about it in the talk on the art of living.
Gayatri Chandavarkar asks a question. Yesterday, someone said that the Buddha said, look without name and form. K2 said the same thing. He said, look without a word, which means name and form. Please guide us about K's teaching about looking at a tree or a person or a thing without words.
He gave that as an exercise because that's easier to do, to look at a tree without thinking about it. It's far more difficult to look at your consciousness without thinking about it or forming opinions about it. So if you begin with the simple, you learn about watching without this distraction of the chattering mind, which is ultimately, you may come to the state where you can observe without the observer. The observer is the entity which is evaluating, judging, condemning, extolling, saying good or bad, and all this, interfering with the phenomena. When that is silent, then there is only passive awareness, not interfering with the phenomenon, but giving all its attention to observing the phenomenon.
Now there is a question from Shankar. Is seeing a flower and its beauty not knowledge from the past? Is a flower just matter?
You have to stay with that question. It can be because there is a lot of sentiment also, which is mistaken for beauty. And there is beauty which is not coming from thought, from sentiment, or from opinion, from the past. So that's why you have to discern that, what you are seeing, whether it's a projection of your own opinions, likes and dislikes, or whether it is sensitivity.
Saurabh Kumar is asking, Sir, how to draw the line in accumulation of money since it's necessary for living?
Nobody can tell you where that line lies. It's not like an engineering drawing where you can draw a line and demarcate two regions. That's why one has to be very attentive and watchful in order to learn about that. For instance, when does a wish turn into a desire? Where does the need become greed? Who's going to give you these boundaries and how? You will have to learn that for yourself. And that's why you have to constantly experiment with your own consciousness, with your own daily life, in order to learn all this. And the learning will enable you to get that feeling. Your own intelligence will tell you where that line lies and where you should stop. But when you don't have that intelligence, you get trapped in addiction or attachment or desire.
A question from Sumitra Gautama. How do these planes connect? What is the role of knowledge then?
The role of knowledge is in creating the question. But it can't answer the question because the truth lies beyond the known. And knowledge is the known. But the known has the role of creating the question. And the question is important. If I take an example from science, millions of people before Newton saw apples fall to the ground, but they didn't discover gravitation. Newton asked the question, why does it fall? And his knowledge of experiments he did in the laboratory to understand motion, told him that when a force acts, then a body moves in the direction of the force and accelerates in that direction. So naturally he asked, what is the force that is causing this apple to fall? And since all apples were falling to the ground, he came to the conclusion that the ground, which is the earth, must be attracting the apple. Then naturally, the next question was, if the earth attracts the apple, do all objects attract all other objects? And he came upon the universal law of gravitation. But it all began with a question. So that is the value of the previous knowledge, that it creates a question in your mind. But you mustn't answer that question with knowledge. You must observe and watch and inquire further with that question in the background. If you just look without a question, you will perceive the beauty and you may experience the joy of watching. But that's not learning. If you see clouds going by, it's a pleasant sight. But if you ask, why does the cloud move? Then you discover that it's because the breeze blows. Why does the breeze blow? Because there is a temperature difference. Why is there a temperature difference? And so on. So the inquiry continues. But the answer comes through observation. And observation gives you further questions also. There is a good metaphor that talks about this. It says that knowledge and reason and analysis are like the poles of the pole vaulter. He can use them to raise himself, but if he doesn't let go of the pole, he can't get to the other side. So it's like that. Your analysis and your reason and logic can create a finer and finer question. But ultimately, it can't take you to the truth, because the truth is not in the brain, it's not in the memory. It's outside there. It needs an insight. And Krishnaji's way of expressing this was to say that the answer doesn't lie outside the question. We look for it in a book or from a guru. The answer lies inside the question. That means when you investigate the question, you can come upon the perception, and that perception is the truth. But when you only do ideation and you get an idea from somebody else as an answer and you accept it, you only have knowledge, you don't have the truth.
A question from E.A. Varghese. If after due introspection, I intuitively conclude that what the Buddha or Jesus said is true, why not treat them as authoritative gurus? Why should we reinvent the wheel all over again, even if it is a psychological one?
Because knowledge does not transform consciousness. In the field of knowledge, there is a guru. There are experts from whom you can get knowledge. But in this religious field, the truth lies at the level of perception. And nobody can give you perception. You have to come upon it yourself. That's what it means that you have to be a light unto yourself. And that's the reason Krishnamurti denied the role of the Guru.
A question from Kartik Gupta. What is meant by humanity shares one consciousness? By analogy, does humanity share one mind?
That we share the same consciousness means that in all human beings, the consciousness functions in a basically similar way. All human beings have fear. All human beings are afraid of failure. All human beings have desire, attachment, possessiveness, jealousy. Our problems are very similar because our consciousness functions in a very similar way. And you can learn about your consciousness by watching other people for that reason. So long as you try to understand why they are doing what they are doing, and then relate it to your consciousness. Because your consciousness functions exactly the same way as the other man's consciousness. There was another part to this question which I have lost.
I will read them again. What is meant by humanity shares one consciousness? And the second part, by analogy, does humanity share one mind?
That depends on what you mean by mind. That word has not been defined very precisely. Often mind is used just to mean intellect. That's not the same as awareness or consciousness. Consciousness is a more holistic term. Mind refers often only to the intellect, which is a function of the brain. But when you talk of the universal mind or the universal consciousness, they are similar. In other words, there is intelligence of nature which is operating in our body. It can operate also in our consciousness, but we have replaced it with the intelligence of our thought. Ten 10,000 things happen just the way they should in my body. All I do is eat some food, take some exercise. That is the intelligence of nature. It maintains that order. And that order we call as health. Health has no cause, but ill health has a cause. And therefore, doctors are able to diagnose the cause and give you medicine to eliminate the cause. Then you return back to order. Similar thing Krishnaji is saying is true of our psyche. That we are causing the disorder. And if we learn not to cause the disorder, then there is order. And that order is love, compassion, harmony, friendship, peace, and so on. No conflict in that. But when you use the intelligence of thought, then it brings in the ego and all the problems connected with the.
A question from Asha. How does insight occur?
Nobody knows because it doesn't have a cause, but it is a mysterious capacity of the human consciousness that it can make a foray into the unknown, pick up something that is not part of the known and bring it into the field of the known and describe it. That's how all great discoveries have been made. And that's how all truth has to be perceived.
Now Chandra is asking, Sir, Kay said, responding to a question on transformation, if you are jealous, watch it. Don't give it time to flower, but change it immediately. Why did he not leave it, watch it, but change it? Does that not imply becoming and a deliberate action here? Did I misunderstand?
Yes, I think that you misunderstand. When he's talking about change, he does not mean change brought about by will. He's saying real change is a byproduct of learning, of understanding what is true and what is false. And in order to understand that, you have to pay attention and watch very carefully so that you don't miss out the nuances. That's why it is hard work. It's not simply a matter of logic and decision. And also, any conclusion that you draw from that becomes knowledge, and that knowledge blocks further perception. So truths should never be turned into knowledge. It's an ability to perceive what is, and you must perceive it afresh. If you have an image and opinion about it, it interferes with your capacity for perception. That's why it's a wholly different way of approaching life.
A question from Shiva Kumar. Was there any comment by J.K. on J Krishnamurti in his later years? What are your thoughts on J, if any?
It's not important to form opinions about people. It has nothing to do with our self-knowledge. And it's at the level of gossip. I've never known Krishnamurti gossip about people.
Ashok Naimpali is asking, in schools based on Krishnamurti's teachings, how do students who graduate from these schools cope with competitive exams? For example, class 12 or university exams, as well as a competitive society?
It varies from student to student. You cannot generalize it. But what you can notice is that when there is too much fear of failure, you tend to memorize answers in the examination and get a higher score without learning the subject. So you are not understanding the very purpose of education. You come to education in order to learn about the universe or about various subjects, and to expand the horizons of your mind. But when you simply memorize the answers, and in order to get more marks in the exam, because that leads to what you consider to be success, you miss out on the value of education. So it's like cheating oneself, because one came in order to understand and expand the vision and horizons of your mind, and instead went back with marks on a sheet of paper.
I will read a question from Chakrapani Kambapati. It took hundreds of years for Christ and Buddha's teachings to come to the central stage. When would you think, sir, that Krishnamurti's teachings will come to the central stage?
No idea. I'm not a futurologist. I can't predict the future. They may not. It depends on us. If few people take it seriously and really come to depth of understanding, they will transform. But I don't think the world will transform, because the whole world is a statistical, 7 billion egos are there. So if a few people change, that doesn't mean that the world changes. They bring something new, but the others need to learn from them. So the Buddha came and went. He transformed himself. Jesus came and went. Socrates came and went. The world is going on the same way. So no one individual can change the world. Krishnamurti could not also change the world. So this inquiry is not done in order to change the world. Otherwise, it will become an egoistic inquiry. It's just to understand the mystery of life.
A question from Narendranath Vasudev. Has Kay talked about Gurdjieff and P.D. Ouspensky? Krishnaji had met Ouspensky.
He never talked about all this with me. I cannot answer whether he did not talk about this with anybody else. But in general, I did not find him expressing opinions about other teachers or other individuals. His teaching is very similar to Buddha's teaching for the monks. But the Buddha also gave a sevenfold path, which Krishnamurti never gave. So Buddha addressed the people who were interested in religious inquiry differently from the rest of society, which was not interested in the religious mind. Krishnamurti never differentiated between these two. He talked only about the absolute.
Prasad Mulupuri is asking, Sir, Kay said human consciousness is one. Hindu tradition says all life and non-life, Brahman, is one. Why has Kay stopped short?
You know, both things are true if you understand what it means. It's like saying in science, everything is energy. It's true. Matter is also energy, electricity is also energy, sound is also energy, heat is also energy. Everything is energy, but it doesn't mean the forms are different. So that's how I understand it. Basically, the human body is the same, whether you are Chinese or Arab or African. It functions the same way. The nervous system, the digestive system, the circulatory system, everything functions exactly the same. Blood can be transfused from one person to another. And the consciousness functions identically. Identically does not is an exaggeration, very similar, in a similar way. No two entities are completely identical in nature. There will always be some differences. But basically, we are the same. All human beings have intelligence, all human beings have awareness, all human beings have fear, and so on. A lot of it is in common. What is different is the conditioning, because you grow up in different families, in different parts of the world, and so on.
A question from Kursaf Razban. Sir, in your book, A Jewel on a Silver Platter, you mentioned that you asked for Kay's blessing during your last conversation with him during his last days, and he gave you his blessing. Can you please expand on that blessing? Does blessing have any value? Isn't it a form of creating authority? Blessing is mostly used in terms of organized religion, which Kay was against.
I didn't ask for a blessing. I asked him if he can wish it for me, because I knew that I understood from his teaching that he can't give it to me. So what I was asking for was that I wanted to have a long vision to know what is right, what is good, and the strength to do what is right. These are the two things I wanted. And since he couldn't give it to me, I said, maybe you can wish it for me. And I have never known anyone in my life wishing with the kind of passion with which he expressed his wish. So that I value that relationship. I don't know whether wishes act or not. That was not the motive.
A question from Saurabh Kumar. Sir, has the chattering absolutely ended in your awareness?
There is no such thing as absolute ending. There is even in our religious literature, there is talk about the devil is all the time walking by the side of the Buddha. Because the ego can form at any moment. All that it needs is the capacity for thinking and imagination, the instinct of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, all of which are all the time present in every human being, including the saint. So one has to be continually aware not to step into the realm of the ego and to remain with love. If the awareness lapses, the ego will form, and the devil does his work through the ego in man.
A question from Sam. Sir, what does it mean the observer is the observed?
Has a number of different meanings. One is that you project a lot of yourself into your observation. So what you are observing is not just the object, but the projection of your own beliefs and so on. So a Hindu looking at the cow sees a goddess there, and the American looking at a cow sees beef. Each one is projecting his own inner state onto what he is observing, though they are both observing the same object. So that's partly the meaning of the observer is the observed. Also, when you are looking at yourself, your own consciousness, then what you are looking at is not separate from the one who is looking. In other words, if you are watching how you get angry, the anger is arising within you, and it's you who are observing it. So you're not different from the anger. If you are separate from the anger, then you can do something about it, treat the anger, destroy the anger, and you can survive, as we do when we have a physical disease which is caused by some virus or some germ. You can take medicine, kill the germ, and you survive. It's not like that. Anger is not a disease which comes to us from outside. It is something that develops within our consciousness. So that's another meaning of the observer is the observer. In other words, there is a lot of interaction between the observer and the observed. The two are like one composite phenomenon. You can't separate. But if the observer is silent, then what he perceives is the truth.
A question from Syamal Rao. Sir, you have made an Upanishadic reference of two birds, one which enjoys eating fruit and the other observing the act of eating. Is the other referred to here the individual self or the universal self?
It is awareness which is universal. My awareness is not separate from your awareness, but my conditioning is separate from your conditioning. So what is in the brain, the memory, that is different. But consciousness is intrinsic quality of consciousness is awareness. When a child is born, it already has awareness. It doesn't have ego. It doesn't have capacity for thinking, but it has awareness. And that awareness enables him to associate words that we utter with the object that he sees. And he picks up language and so on. And then thinking ability develops. So awareness is prior to the ability to think and to have language.
A question from Ingrid. Do you know what was K's relation with his practice of yoga regarding, for instance, pranayama and Yoga Sutra teachings, or practicing specific exercises to bring freshness and space to the mind?
The only thing I know is that he did yoga and pranayama for 1 to 2 hours every day. But he did not recommend to others that they must do it also. He did it because to keep his body alert and healthy. But other people can use other methods to look after their body. So he didn't make a big requirement, but he himself personally did pranayama and yoga. He found that useful.
So I just wanted to highlight that we're 2 minutes away from our allotted time and would like to maybe turn it over to Professor Krishna and the organizers to see if there is anything you would like to say.
No, I just want to thank all of you for giving the attention to whatever I had to express or say. This is not an interpretation of Krishnamurti, it's an investigation of his teaching. So you must distinguish between my investigation and his teaching. It's not that I am an authority on his teaching. That is not true. In fact, his teaching, he said, there is no such thing as my teaching, he said. The entire purpose of what I am saying is to make you realize the need to understand yourself. And once you have used my teaching as a mirror to look at yourself, you can throw away the mirror. It has no value. What is necessary is to understand yourself. So the object to be understood is not the teaching, but yourself.
Sir, I'll take this opportunity to thank Professor Krishna from the depth of my heart and also from all of the participants who have joined here. A sincere gratitude to you, sir, and on behalf of Ulrich. And I'm even more grateful to the team who has worked so hard to bring these talks together. Prasad, Krasimir, Asif, Jaime, and a host of other people who have worked in the background that you may not even be aware of.
Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your friendship.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Ulrich, sir, would you like to say anything, sir?
No, you said it very well. Thank you. I cannot add more. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Well said, and to help including Jamie, who did a great work.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody. So,
Bye now.
bye, sir. Until next time.
Sure.
Thank you very
Anytime.
much.